Hey guys, it's Bales. I'm at FantasyLabs, and I wanted to do a video to show you how I use our multi-lineup tool and player pool and player liking features to build lineups. So we're looking at my running back model for DraftKings for the divisional playoffs, and Peter Jennings just posted a model preview at the running back position, so you can go through and compare this one to his rankings, and you'll see. I think there's a lot of similarities. I think our models are pretty similar at running back. I think it's one of the more straightforward positions where you're emphasizing workload more so than anything else, and probably makes sense to pay for those top backs. And this week, especially with Le'Veon and Zeke, and then to a lesser extent Devontae Freeman in a worse matchup, you have some elite guys that clearly stand out. So I'm not going to talk too much about the specific running backs, but I wanted to show you how I select players and how I use the multi-lineup tool. So I'm just going to go through, and the first thing I do, which I did at every other position already, is I go through and I unlike all players at once, and then just manually select the ones that I would potentially want to show up in lineups. So in this particular slate, a 4-game slate, there's obviously not that many players, and it's probably not optimal to have a wide range of exposure. You probably want to be closer to optimal than other weeks, just because there's not that many options, and the more you diversify, the closer you're going to be to just losing to the rake, or just not having plus EV lineup. So we'll select all of the players who I would have some exposure to this week, and I haven't looked at this too much. This is more just a sample. And then what I do is only these liked players would show up in lineups, even if you optimize, even if you generate multiple lineups. These are the guys who would show up in there. And then I set a min and max exposure, or at least one of them, for each player. And I don't. It's generally a fairly narrow range, but it's a range that I would be comfortable having that player. So we'll go ahead and do that with we'll say we want Devontae Freeman in at least 20%, but no more than 50% of lineups. That's actually a wider range than I would use. We'll say 25 and 40. And I'll show you how I get closer to the exact range. So if I want Devontae in really 30 or 35% of lineups, we can get him pretty close to that. And we'll say we want Spencer Ware in no more than 20. We want Zeke in at least 50. We want Dion Lewis in no more than 40. We want Le'Veon in at least 50. We'll actually go higher on Zeke. We'll say Zeke in at least 60. And you can also set a cap on all players once you open up the multi-lineup tool, which is what I do a lot. So I don't need to, even if I don't want Zeke in 100% of lineups, I don't need to set that here. I can set that I want no player in more than 80% or whatever it is. We'll say Ty Montgomery in at least 5%, no more than 25. Same for Coleman. You can set these however you'd like. This is just an example, and these are even wider probably than what I could have. So we'll set a narrow one. So we'll say Ty Montgomery in at least 15 to 25. Okay, so I did this at the other positions, and when you're ready, you go to the Generate Multiple Lineups tab, and then you have a few decisions to make. So the first one is how many lineups you want. So if you're doing this for, say, the Millionaire Maker or something, you're probably going to have a certain number of lineups you'd like. So we'll say for this, because it's a 4-game slate and there's just not as many potential lineups to play, we'll say that I want to do 20. So one option that you have is to just select 20 and generate those lineups. You can do other features or filters I'll show you in a second, and you can generate those. And maybe the lineups will come close to your desired exposure, in which case you can save them. To get even closer, I do fewer lineups. So we'll start with 10, and we'll build these optimizing for project ceiling. And then in our we have a diversification meter, which basically allows you to truly optimize or to truly randomize as much as you want. So if I set this to 10, that would be truly building random lineups based on the players that I have, the players who I've liked, and their rating. So they're randomized, but it's randomized according to probabilities based on how high they are in your model, whereas zero diversification is truly optimal. Normally I use 2, sometimes 3 if I've already locked in players. Sometimes you want to truly randomize because you've locked in so many players and you have a very narrow player pool, in which case randomizing around a core group of players I think can make sense. In this particular slate, probably, like I said, want to be closer to optimal. So we'll go with 1, which will be very close to optimal lineups, but not completely optimal as to make it hard to build lineups around the player exposures, the min and max that I set. Min salary cap, max salary cap, you can set. Sometimes you don't want to use the entire cap, especially in a sport like golf. For the millionaire maker, very easy to get duplicate lineups. And I think I saw some stats that it's maybe impossible to be profitable long term, certainly with a duplicate lineup, but even filling the entire cap. Max exposure, like I said, so this will apply to every player. We'll set it at 75%, so no player will be in more than 75% of our lineups. Flex positions, I remove tight end, which I generally don't want, although you can use it maybe in a slate like this. Max players on the same team, we'll actually set to 4 because of the small slate. I didn't have any groups set, but you can set groups of players and set exposure to those. Avoid opposing defense, force a stack, we still want that. Only 1 skill player per team, we don't want that in this slate. Use a wide receiver tight end on the opposite team when possible. We will select that because it won't force it, but whenever possible it will build more or less of a game stack, which I think is particularly valuable in a 4-game slate. Stacking up an entire game isn't a bad idea. Only 1 running back per game, we don't need that. So then with those filters set, we can build those 10 lineups, and then we have those 10. You can go through and manually select the ones that you like. We'll just assume that I like all of them, but if you don't, you just can click off of it and then hit save lineups, and those lineups will go to your lineups tab. So I actually had already built one, so we have 11 now. And then here are your player exposures. You can edit them as you'd like. You can see exposure to players. So we have Matt Ryan in 27% lineups. So that would be 3 of the 11. If I if I type in Ryan, it will show the actually might need to do Matt. It'll show the 3 lineups with Matt Ryan, and then the exposures of the of players in only those lineups. So Zeke is in 100% of lineups with Matt Ryan, and so you can see the overlap, and then you can sort by different stats. So we have 11 now. We wanted 20. We'll go back. Let's say that we and these are just sample exposures, by the way. Let's say we now have Zeke in 64%. We have Le'Veon in only 36. So we definitely want Le'Veon in more lineups. So we'll go back and we'll change his exposure and build a few more, but we're going to change it to a minimum of 60%. And the multi-lineup builder will get as close. We'll actually do 70. We'll get as close as possible while still following your rating. So it's likely that the windows I set would actually be prohibitive. So you saw Le'Veon was in 36%. That's more or less the closest that the multi-lineup tool could get to 50% given my ratings and given how I selected a player pool and how I set the min and max exposures. So we'll set him to 70, and then we will see what happens. Let's also, you can see the actual exposures here as well. So let's say we, Devontae Freeman was in a few more, so we'll actually bump him down to a max of 30 and no min. And he'll still show up in a bunch because he's at the top of the model. If you don't want him in any, you can unlike him. And once we get closer to the 20 lineups, we can start to build fewer and fewer. So now we'll do 5. We'll do the same settings. So we're going for ceiling, close to optimal. Actually, as you get closer to the 20, you may want to diversify more. We'll go max exposure of 80, no tight end, and the same settings, and we'll build those 5 lineups. And again, you can manually select the ones that you'd like, save lineups, and you can see Le'Veon was in 60% of those, so he's moved up a little bit. So now Zeke and Le'Veon are the top exposures. We're 4 away from the goal of 20 lineups. You can remove any lineups that you'd like as well that don't necessarily fit the exposure. So I'm just constantly trying to balance these exposures. And once I get very close, there's certain guys who I might say, okay, I definitely need more of this player. For this particular slate, we can still say it's Le'Veon or Zeke. Let's say we're really high on Zeke. Now I just want Zeke in all of those lineups, and I just lock him in. And when you do that, he's guaranteed to show up in all of the lineups. So we'll leave the diversification there. Do the same thing. We'll build those 4 lineups, and we generate those, and Zeke will be in all of them. And we save them and go back. And now you can see Le'Veon, because I locked Zeke in, Le'Veon dropped down. So it might be the case that we want both of those guys, and so maybe we can start to tweak this by deleting some lineups that maybe have some guys that we think we have too much exposure to. So we'll go ahead and just obviously I'm going to be putting not as much thought into this as I would otherwise, but we'll delete a few non-Le'Veon lineups, and we're at 17. And let's go ahead and lock in Zeke and Le'Veon. And hopefully I can generate lineups. This is obviously going to be a little bit tougher with the exposures that I've set, but we'll see if I left open enough room to be able to do that. And I did. I was able to generate 2 lineups. So we'll save those, and we're at 19, and then we're closer to the exposures maybe that we want at running back. And you're just constantly trying to balance that and changing those windows as you go. So this is a sort of a shortened version of the process that I use to get close to the exposures that I'd like for certain players. So I'll usually build maybe 40% or 50% at once, select those, see where I am with the exposures, mess around with the min and max at each position, and then as I get closer to the goal of how many lineups I want to create, I'm going to be more likely to remove guys, unlike them, lock them in, set their exposures very high or very low, and things like that, just so I can get close to the goal. And fairly quickly, I would say if I want to do as fast as possible, in a given week I could build 100 lineups and get very close to my desired exposure in maybe 20 minutes or so, maybe 30 minutes, just because I've figured out how to perfect the process a bit. So this is my process for generating multiple lineups. There's a lot of other little features that you can use, saving templates, building groups, building stacks, and locking those in or getting exposure to those as you'd like. So definitely play around with it, but I do think that the new multi-lineup tool, the new player liking features with the improved logic behind the scenes are definitely really valuable for DFS players and a big upgrade over what we had before.